So the financial value of brands has been a heated topic for a lot of my professional lifetime, and we wanted to make some significant progress in this. And it's interesting. The future interest in brand value measurement is actually been growing substantially over time. And we did a survey in conjunction with the ANA. As Dave mentioned, I worked there or served as chair there for a number of years. Knowing the comparables on this is really a high degree of interest when you get 86% of the respondents saying that they've got a moderate or higher level of interest in measuring the financial value of a brand. We did some further work on that, and initially we were very pleased. We surveyed about 950 marketers. We got 80 responses, and we were very pleasantly surprised that 26% reported that they were measuring the value of their brands in economic or financial terms. That indication turned out, however, to be a false positive, and we were in fact using that term before the pandemic hit. And when we did very in-depth one-on-one interviews as follow-up, it was clear that people were doing more brand health kind of things than and really not getting down to what is the financial valuation of the brand. So, in this journey, there are lots of conversations. If you switch to the next page, there's some common ones that you're probably hearing when you talk about this. You get the brand values can't be measured. People say, well, these amounts are soft. They'll talk about the published brand values from sources like Brand Finance or Brand Z, and they'll say that they're quite divergent. How do you explain that? And often you'll hear pretty sophisticated marketers even say, well, we already have enough metrics and we don't need to add another one to the mix. So Dave was kind enough to speak at one of our gatherings a couple of years ago, and this is his quote, which is, brand value is such an important part of firm value that clearly you should be trying to measure it and protect it and build it. But I don't think that's well understood even by marketers. So that was kind of early in our journey to put forth what we hope would be a document which dealt with the historical study of the financial value of brands, but also talk about kind of a path forward. And clearly, it's not news to anybody that's participating in this session. The job of marketing is really to shift the demand curve, upward and to the right, if you will. And then it's the choice of the business, whether it's the individual brand owner or the larger enterprise, to decide how much of that increased demand curve they capture, either in price increase or volume and margin. As a quick aside, there's a lot of conversation now because of perception and I think reality of inflation happening. How are the brands going to do in this regard? A lot of brands that may have pulled back a little bit on their marketing efforts seem to be not raising prices but reducing the quantity of their the unit that they're offering, because they don't think that they have the strength to go forward. And we could certainly discuss that. In addition to the kind of individual brand benefit, one of the things that really excites me is if everybody did better marketing, and we really kind of focused on the financial value of brand as a calculation, there's a macroeconomic benefit. And there's actually a study from McKinsey that goes back several years, which I think is important to cite, which is their estimate at that point in time was that the macro benefit would be plus 5 million jobs and plus $1 trillion in GDP, which is roughly 5%, because current GDP, from a U.S. basis, is about 20 trillion. Personally, I would say that I'm happy to use this number because I push off it a little bit and say I'm a little bit more conservative than they are in those calculations. But even if it was only 20% of that, you're still talking about an extra million jobs. And jobs, in I think much of anybody's work in economics or politics, jobs are a driver of a better society in lots of ways. So having more jobs out there is actually a very important kind of macro objective. Next slide, please, Dave. So you're all probably familiar with Kevin Keller, and Kevin too was a participant in the session that we did a couple of years ago, and Kevin is clearly an expert on kind of brand audits, as he says here. I'm a big believer in doing brand audits, at least on an annual basis. Figuring out the valuation part is taking the audit one step further. So that was contributing to our team's focus on this and saying we really need to move this ahead. So this standard that I'm talking about, we actually were able to unanimously get it passed by ISO, which to our knowledge is a rather rare thing to happen. This is a meta standard framework. As you can see, it's identified by ISO 20671. And I'm particularly proud to represent the MASB team that worked on this because candidly, the team did an awful lot to create, hone, socialize, discuss, and modify the standard so that it would indeed gain approval. But what we noticed when this happened, meta standards are interesting because the question always kind of comes down to, well, now what should we do? So I'm pleased to talk publicly today for the first time about a paper that we are issuing, which is called the Financial Value Brand Imperative. And I can't claim that I'm the sole author, because I'm definitely not. We are very well represented by Vitala Rao from the S.C. Johnson Graduate School of Management at Cornell, and then our fabulous executive director, Frank Finley, at MASB, and one of our great contributors who spent a big portion of his career at Miller Coors, Jim Meyer. But working with them and a very wide circle of academic representatives, measurement company representatives, brands, CMOs, we really worked on a document that we hope is sought out as a point of view on the financial value of brands. So Dave, if you could switch to the next page, please. And we're probably taking some of the salesmanship that a lot of the tech companies do in terms of when they put forth research by saying, why brands must do this. But we're actually very, very pleased with the outcome of this. And in terms of the theory and practice of marketing, we hope that it lives up to our objective, where it does summarize all of the relevant theory, but also makes a turn at the end where we say, what do I do now? What should we be doing? And actually, if we have another minute for me to go through that, I'll go through the kind of 4 steps, which may seem obvious, but we're trying to essentially curate the process for businesses and brands that want to do this. First and foremost, you got to get executive buy-in, right? A lot of those questions that I put up earlier and further questions that might be added to the list are all the reasons that people hesitate and often do not complete the exercise of coming up with a calculation of the financial value of their brand. Part of that is picking a methodology, right? There are a number of measurement providers out there, and I would say that especially in the conversations that we've had with marketers, they really want somebody else to say, given the nature of our business, what methodology do you think might be most applicable to our business to get the best valuation? And by best valuation, they're not necessarily indicating that they want to get the highest one, but the one that's most useful as a management tool in terms of assessing changes in that value over time.
Tony, let me interrupt you just for a second and ask you a quick question on your point number 1 here, which is, gaining executive buy-in. And I'd be interested in your sense of whether or not you're going to be able to get that. And in particular, I'm thinking not just of the CFOs, but I'm also thinking about the CMOs. And what is your sense about whether or not you can get both the CMO and the CFO to agree to, yes, we should do this, and agree on a methodology?
The degree of difficulty, Dave, is going to be, I think, high. We had thought, perhaps optimistically, that when we had the ISO standard passed, that CMOs would be happy because they could then walk in and say, there's this global standard passed by ISO. We should go ahead and do this. And we should be, to use the C word, we should be in compliance with it, right? That didn't happen. And, I guess one of the benefits of having been a marketer and interacting with many over the years is I could call up people that I knew and said, so why does this not matter to you, right? And there was part of it was, I would say, fear-based, even from pretty capable people, because they would say, I don't need another metric on which to be judged. I already have too many. And the whole discussion about longer-term value of marketing was probably in at least some organizations kind of a third rail that the CMO and the CFO decided not to touch, because they had vastly different points of view about that. So I don't think executive buy-in is going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination. But what we're hopeful of is that the paper lays out some pretty basic examples and talking about things like optionality that, I think somebody who's a CFO or CEO would say, why wouldn't I want to know that, right? There's a CFO of a large consumer goods company that you all know, who at a session a couple of years ago said the future value of our enterprise is most tied to the strength of our brands. Now, if that is indeed the case, dealing with all the complexities of how you report, shouldn't that be part of the conversation, at least internally in companies? Forget about external reporting. But the narrative on all of this, Dave, is this is too hard to do, and is it really worth the effort? Especially when it's something that is not a point in time piece. It's something where you got to measure over an extended period of time.
So you were a CMO. Yep. And you were a CMO that watched your brand continue to grow, but sometimes brand value doesn't grow, brand actually goes down. I have a sense, just in some of the discussions I've had, that CMOs are going to be more resistant to it than CFOs because brand value might go down. And as you said, this is just one more measure for me to be evaluated by, and sometimes it might be out of my control.
I think you're probably right. From my perspective, my pushback to them, and I don't mean to be kind of cheeky with this comment, but I'm like, well, do you want to get paid in brand awareness Bitcoin, right? No, you want to get paid in dollars and cents. And shouldn't you want the effect of what you're doing to be demonstrable in dollars and cents, right? That, I wouldn't say that convinces people, but that kind of that has them rethink their position on it a little bit. The other common piece, which really has been pretty successful with CFOs, not necessarily CMOs, is they'll say, well, if we pick a methodology and we don't like them here, what do we do? What do we do? Can we just change it? And to me, the example there from the accounting, for the cost world, is think about cost of goods sold, right? You can switch from FIFO to LIFO or average cost. Obviously, you shouldn't be doing it every year, but if there's a good reason to do it, so if you find a better way, you can move forward. I think that argument with people of a financial or accounting orientation has actually got some people to rethink that piece too.
Yeah. So Don Lehman asked a good question in chat that I would forward to you, which is, he said, do we have any evidence that companies that measure the value of brands do better than those that don't? Of course, we have the direction of causality.
So we
concerned about.
Yeah. So there is there's correlation evidence on a number of fronts, but one of the reasons that we're actually asking for people to be part of a pilot study is because we want to show that and demonstrate that even more fully. There are some optionality examples that are in the paper that I would point you to, and to us, the study that I referenced from McKinsey a few years back would again, I would say it's not causality, but there's at least a relationship there that's demonstrated.
Okay, and then Venki asked what I think is a very sensitive question. I didn't say sensible, Venki. I said a sensitive one, which is, and it's one I'm all in with you on this one. But even if CMOs agree, are we at a point where we can persuade CFOs and CEOs and accounting standards to think about even putting this on our financial books and in the balance sheet?
So as Dave and I both know, because we've had this great debate, our focus on this is for companies to do this, to use this as a management tool, right? I think it's an appropriate question to ask, what the reporting piece of this is. I think that the likelihood of this being considered, if you put it in the immediately into the reporting arena, is that it's not going to happen, right? And it's the very considered opinion of MASB that we're focusing on this as a management tool, not necessarily more broadly reported. Now, you can make an argument, and Dave and I have had this debate for several years now, that shouldn't you have to report on something that's material to the value of a brand? I would personally say yes to that, but I don't think that helps us advance the consideration, the piloting, and the adoption of this in the near term. So, you can accuse me, perhaps accurately, of being pragmatic and perhaps expedient here, but I think I want to get people doing this, and then we can deal with the further ramifications of it. I actually, perhaps, in an idealistic manner, think that some brands might want to do this as a way of differentiating themselves from their competitors, right? If you're, think about everybody, having the conversation about sustainability and what sustainable brands are, right? Well, a sustainable brand or a sustainable business should have a strong brand. And if it is a strong brand, why wouldn't you want to report on it as such? The also related to that, I would say, there's tremendous competition right now for the various streaming services looking for their customer bases. They are all reporting on the ebbs and flows of their customer bases, and that's in many models. That's a significant factor, of course, in the financial calculation of the brand. So in some ways, it's happening in some categories already.
And Raghu has a question for you. Raghu, you want to ask your question?
Sure, certainly. Thank you, Tony, first for being here and talking to the audience. My question was, a lot of the audience here, quite a few of them are academics. And, obviously they're very interested in kind of doing rigorous academic studies. But from your point of view, what would be a study that you think you would love to have and people to focus on that you think would have a lot of impact and a lot of visibility?
Well, it'll be a little bit of a long answer, Raghu, but I'll try to keep it somewhat simple. The difficulty of measuring essentially top of the funnel metrics, if you use the funnel as a construct for how marketing works, the complexity of measuring them has led a lot of people not to measure them well, right? So most of the attribution models, in my experience, fall short of kind of long-term brand effects, right? So that's kind of a big topic, but I'll if you indulge me, this is kind of blending into sponsorship for a second. Years ago when I was running Momentum, the experiential marketing firm, created it with a couple of colleagues, we were responsible for the Olympic torch relay as it wound its way through the United States going to Atlanta in 1996. And when that torch made its way to New York, I had visited our team on the road because we had 70 plus people on the road, literally every day and night, setting up the structure of who was going to run that day, what order. You had dignitaries, you stopped at town halls, you stopped at, Safeways and Kroger's and other grocery stores that had a lot of Coke in, stacked at the end aisle. that was a really hard task, right? So when they came to New York, I went up to in the Heights, as the show was launched the other night, went up into Washington Heights, and I was wearing a pair of jeans and a Coke Torch Relay T-shirt. And back then, that was a tougher neighborhood than it is now. And within the span of about 3 blocks, a number of teenagers, young, two young guys and a young gal, they basically said to me the same thing, which was, "Mister, thank you so much for bringing Coca-Cola to my neighborhood, because nothing good ever happens here," right? So I was at McCann on the time. I was responsible for Coke advertising in the U.S. with my team. And the great debate that I kind of initiated the next day at the office was, okay, that experience is going to be part of the memory of those individuals for a long time to come. Can you compare to me the influence of that versus the influence of the commercial that we're running? Or said another way, what's the equation for how many ad exposures I got to get for that same piece? There have been advancements in attribution, but the stuff that sticks long term is still not really measured well. And if I could just add one other example, there's a high profile tech company that's been mentioned many times today in this session. And one of their analytics guys and I had a chance to present a couple of years ago at an ARF piece. And we were talking about what was working or not working. And he said, here it is November. And we ran a commercial in the Super Bowl in February. And that commercial is still driving various things. And we're astonished that it has that long an effect, right? So there are short-term effects and long-term effects of marketing activities. I would love some more disciplined scholarship on the long-term effect and the value of that.
Yeah. Okay, that'd be great. Tony, I'm going to let you go through the last 2 points of this very quickly, and then jump to your second research topic that you're interested in, just so we can be sure to get that in and open it up to other questions. So you had a 4-point step. Here are the other 2.
Yep, and the other 2 were focus on reasonable, consistent goals for accuracy in analyzing trends. And then, most folks have a good ROI, return on marketing investment, ROMI or ROI tool in place. The whole notion of putting the financial value of brands in the calculation of it into a continuous improvement process, we think is pretty important. And this may be a simplification of it, but I had a lot of conversations about a year ago, relatively early in the pandemic, with marketers that were looking for help when their budgets were being eviscerated because people didn't know what the demand was going to be. And I said to them at that point in time, and I don't think I was being opportunistic, I said, well, if you knew the value of your brand, being able to say that we have a brand that is worth this much, can we really afford not to support it and just hope it stays the same way during this period of time? And I can't divulge all the specifics of this, but a couple people that I talked to said that argument actually carried weight in preventing their budget from going to zero. It was cut because people were panicking about what demand, if any, would be there. But it was a useful argument with their CFO and their CEO to not make everything zero, not to zero it out, but to use some spending. So, my last pitch is on this is, we have a pilot. Some of the people that have been on the marketing side that are part of this are actively considering doing this for some of their brands. And if you know of brands that are interested, we'd sure be happy to help kind of curate the process.